there, Virtual Space Hero community, and welcome to this week's live stream, Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live, about remote hybrid work and collaboration in the virtual space or in a hybrid environment. I'm super excited because today we sort of combine in this live stream two aspects, two topics that I've been passionate about. One is, of course, remote and hybrid work. The other one is also a topic that as a researcher, I was focusing on for many years when I was a professor in Austria, and it is diversity. And I'm really happy today because I have someone on my virtual space or LinkedIn live stage who is a customer and remote work experience advocate, an expert in the field, who is going to discuss with me the question on how diversity, equity, and inclusion can be enhanced in a remote work environment. And with that, I'm saying hello and open the virtual doors to Anne Bibb from Support Ninja. Hi there, Anne.
Hi, Barbara. I am Anne Bibb with Support Ninja, and I am the Chief Experience Officer. I've been working remotely for, oh my goodness, for more than 20 years now. So we were doing it before it was cool, and also working hybrid in many situations. So a lot of people define hybrid differently, and that is really, for me, it's because I travel and I'm often going into the office maybe one day a week, or I might work at home full time and then I'll travel to a client site. So I look at myself as a hybrid worker because of that. So many people determine hybrid differently, but that's how I look at hybrid, is that sometimes I'm working at home, sometimes I'm working at a client site or at my office. Just depends on what I'm doing that week. But I have a lot of benefits and a lot of diverse employees because of that remote work from anywhere capability that we have. And I've done that in a lot of different organizations. And that's really one of the biggest benefits that I've seen.
Fantastic, Anna. And we are already sort of jumping directly into the topic because we do know that there are still underrepresented groups in our organizations today. And we do also know that remote work and or hybrid work are potential environments where underrepresented groups have more possibility to thrive. So let's dive into the topic. You already started with that, and it's fantastic that you have so much experience. And I assume that for Support Ninja, it wasn't really a big change when 2020 with the pandemic and the working from home happened. You still were able to onboard, collaborate virtually with all your team members, right?
We absolutely were. Now, we did have to move a lot of individuals at home very quickly that were already in the office, but it was because we were already doing it to a certain effect. It was fairly easy for us to move fairly quickly. I mean, we moved hundreds of people in 6 hours. So it was very easy because we already had those processes in place. That said, we were talking about, how can remote work enhance workplace diversity? And I think that there's something else to that, right? And it's really what are also the benefits of diversity. And it's those two really kind of go together, though, right? One of the things about it is removing the geographic barriers with remote work. When you are looking at a singular location for an office, you're talking about only being able to hire in this small area within a certain area. And that really limits the diversity pool that you're able to recruit from, that you're able to hire from. Whenever you start recruiting remotely, you can recruit from anywhere. It really opens up, and you're easier to hire from diverse backgrounds and demographics. You're not just talking about the best talent pool, you're opening up to anyone from anywhere. And when we're talking about diversity, we're not just talking about the color of someone's skin. We're not talking about religious background. We're also talking about diversity of thought. The people that you bring in, it's about the way that someone is thinking as well. So there's all kinds of diversity that we're thinking about. Also, you're thinking about when you're in a remote background, it's natural. I mean, in person, it's natural to think about and worry about sticking out. If you don't look and talk and think the same way, and you're worried about being different from other people. So it really plays to biases or unconscious biases. So in a remote environment, people are more inclined to be very productive or maybe work harder because they feel like they can be their self. There's a real potential for psychological safety in a lot of our groups, LGBTQ, people of color, single individuals that are potentially in a religious area that they don't feel like they're accepted because they have to take multiple breaks. They feel safer in a remote environment and they feel protected. So it opens up all of these individuals who are going to make your company better because they feel safer in their home and working. And the work product that they're doing because they feel safe is amazing. So it really benefits both you and your employees.
But let me just, one thought that popped up while you were saying, well, and we can be ourselves, we feel safer. Of course, this is also sort of sad, right? Because it clearly points out that our today's organizations and the way we are working together when we are in the same place is still a very biased way, right? So I read a study in preparing for today's conversation with you, Anne, and it mentioned that remote work helps eliminate the visual element from work, and this is even more beneficial if it relates to race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation in a remote working environment. So this, of course, means, okay, on one hand, we do know that remote work is better and helps a diverse workforce to thrive, but it's also because we are not there yet, right? If we are working together in the same space.
And I think you pointed out something very important, that bias, it's unconscious bias. People don't think that they are biased. It's something innately within them that they just think, oh no, I think the world of Barbara, I don't realize that I have this unconscious bias against people with blonde hair. I don't think that. I know. Who knew? It happens. So it's that thing that people don't even know that they're doing until it is pointed out. But that still happens in today's world.
And I'm just adding something. I had a very strong conversation, a very difficult conversation with a client this week. It was about a visual where we were including something what we're producing for them. We were including a woman with a scarf, with a hijab, with a scarf, and the client asked me to take it out, and the argument was, well, this is not our reality. And I was like, but this is the reality in Austria. What do you mean with this is not our reality? And it is a very traditional client, but it was very strong because also when we're now discussing about how their employees might feel safer now because they would be allowed and or able to wear the hijab, even though they're not allowed and or able implicitly to wear it in the office, right? And it's very strong. It's super heavy to think about it that way, no?
And that goes back to that comment about psychological safety. It's not just about physical safety, although that is an important thing, but psychological safety in the workplace is an important thing in today's world. And if you don't feel psychologically safe, in addition to physically safe in your workplace, then there's work to be done. And a lot of that has to do with unconscious bias.
And the important fact is that as many companies, also that organization is struggling finding the right talent. And of course, they are leaving not only because not being a remote first company, but also because not being a diverse company, they are leaving and letting untapped a huge talent pool existing in Austria and across the globe, right?
That's exactly it. And again, going back to removing geographic barriers and opening up to diverse talent pools, you can open it up to individuals that are in lower economic areas. that you're talking about the potential of lifting people up out of poverty. What
Yeah.
an amazing thing that you're able to do, and your organization is able to help with just by opening up the doors with remote work. Able to expand your business to areas of the country or of the world that up until that time potentially did not have the ability to work for an organization like yours. And those individuals now have the ability to make a higher pay wage, and you're lifting individuals up out of poverty. You are
Yeah.
changing lives, not just for this generation, but the next.
And I think this is a really powerful message that you are able to change lives. And yeah, great, amazing. Thanks a lot, Anne. So we talked about the benefits. We talked about why diversity and inclusion is so important. Do you also see challenges that are posed by the remote work model?
There are. And if you ever talk to somebody that says there are not challenges, remote work is the golden egg, and we should all go there because there's nothing wrong with it, they're not telling you the truth. Because there are challenges, and there's challenges from a couple of different aspects. There's challenges for an individual, and there are challenges both from a team perspective, right? And every company is going to it's going to be a little bit different. It's remote work is not hybrid work, not a one size fits all. Every organization has to look at it from their own perspective. But when you're looking at it from the team perspective, collaboration can be a little bit more complicated. It can be a little different. You have to look at it for your organization and figure out how you're going to collaborate differently. Some individuals collaborate better in person than they do remotely. There are a lot of tools that are great for online and working and collaborating. Mural, Miro, there are some fantastic tools that help with this. You can still whiteboard and do the things that you can do in person, but some people just don't work good that way. There's, from a team perspective, trying to figure out how to track tasks and productivity. It is possible, but it is something that you have to be purposeful about, and you have to work through it. From an individual perspective, loneliness, it is a thing. If you have to make sure that you are still seeing or talking to people, you can't just lock yourself in your office and just work 24/7. Otherwise, you're going to become a hermit. And that is not, we saw a lot of people through the pandemic that weren't used to working from home start to suffer through depression. And that was because they didn't learn how to work from home. The pandemic, and I'm going to say it, you've heard a lot of remote work experts say it. I'm going to say it again. The pandemic, people that were working from home, that was not remote work. That was working through a crisis. That was working from home during a crisis, during a pandemic. That was not the standard remote work. Now, if people were trained for remote work, that's different.
Yeah, and I think this is such a powerful and important message that you're putting in here, that the pandemic was not remote work, it was working through a crisis. This is also why sometimes I get the fantastic statement from organizations. Well, but in the pandemic, we saw that women were totally overwhelmed by working from home. Well, okay, if we see that women probably had to do homeschooling, had to cook and do all the things while they were still working full time, of course this cannot be working. And all that in a male breadwinner model where the husband very often even in the most progressive countries, you still see that there is a male breadwinner model to some extent in place. And so it was really interesting to see that then, of course, in a crisis, we cannot enhance female diversity, for example, through remote work, but also picking up here on my PhD. And my PhD was about gender and age in the Austrian banking industry. And number one, all the female leaders that I interviewed mentioned is flexible work options. And that's where, of course, remote work comes in.
Exactly. And that's a big thing, is being able to learn how to juggle, learn how to time manage, learn how to be flexible. If you don't know how to do that, and the world was thrown into it without learning how to do it. And
Mm-mm.
it's hard for your mental health. So a lot of people suffered, and that was very difficult. Not only did we see a mass wave of depression, we saw a lot of suicides. We saw a lot of individuals that suffered through through people getting hurt, and individuals, spouses hurting the other spouse because there was that happening, and then there was no protection for them. So you've got to make sure that in the real world, now that we're getting back to some sense of normalcy, if people need to work where they work best, and if that is at home, or if they need the safety of being able to go back to the office and have that hybrid environment, so that you're seeing, is anything happening, that's how they're allowed to work. We shouldn't be forcing them into something that they're not,
Mm-mm.
going to
And
do.
I think this is so important because also diversity is about providing the fitting, to say so, environment for each individual, which also means, of course, that flexibility to choose
Exactly.
where and when I work is so important. And I think this is important because sometimes I posted it several times on LinkedIn. I see the discussion a little bit one-sided on LinkedIn. There are all those remote first companies and all remote companies who are just talking about the future is all remote. Dear God, we do know that the future is not all remote. It's impossible. How many, we're talking about such a small percentage also of knowledge workers that are even able to work remotely, first of all. And the second thing is, if the futures are remote, that is not choice, because choice is to be able to choose to work where I need to work, right? And if that's in an office with colleagues and not only just my own desk in a co-working that my company is paying for me, so maybe that is what I need to have in place, right?
I know so many people who would not have applied for a job if it were remote, or would not have applied for a job if it were in office. Giving the they want to either work in the office or they want to work remote, but they would have applied for the position based on the location. So that is a very important factor. And the important thing here, as we're talking about diversity, is making sure that as we're looking for remote and opening up that capability, are we giving individuals that option, right? And
Mm,
are we giving them the option to be flexible? Yes, remote work opens up the geographic capabilities. It opens up the option for diversity of thought, of diversity of individuals, of who we're going to be able to attract as an employer. But it's not just about remote work, right? It is about the flexibility of being able to work
mm,
where you're going to be most successful and where you're going to be able to provide your best work. If I'm
mm,
at home when I'm feeling most productive, then I'm going to provide the best work product. If I feel like going into the office that day because I've got mass chaos, my dogs are being unruly, my roof is being worked on, I don't want to work at home. I'm not going
mm,
to have a good day. I want to go into the office. Having
mhm.
the flexibility to be able to do so provides the best work product for my employer.
Yeah.
So that alone is providing better work product.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just picking up here on one comment that we're getting. Thank you so much. Really interesting point there. Is that creating a challenge to adjust people's expectations to a true remote work compared to working through the crisis? So this probably refers to one of the previous points a few seconds ago that we discussed. And I'm not sure, are you able to pick up on this a little bit out of context a little bit later?
That creating a challenge to adjust people's expectations to a true remote work compared to working through a crisis. I think again, every organization is adjusting to this, right? And we're seeing a lot of news about organizations that are trying to start to. Everybody has to come in the office, or we're going to stay remote all the time, or we're going to go a hybrid, and we're going to start making people come in 2 days a week and then stay at home 3 days a week. And a lot of organizations are maneuvering through that change from remote work through a crisis back into where we are now. They're trying to find their own way through that. And each organization is going to struggle through that in their own way. But my encouragement to every organization is listen to your employees, right?
Mm,
Your employees are going to tell you how they're going to work best. Having that flexibility is incredibly important in today's world, because what is happening is wild. I mean, let's face it. Every time we think we're past the pandemic, it tells us, it laughs in our face. And every time we think we're past one, another one starts rearing its ugly head. So we need to make sure that our employees, again, feel psychologically safe and physically safe in whatever we're rolling out as an organization, and versus putting our foot down and saying, this is the way it absolutely will be. So making sure that we're transitioning out of that remote work in a crisis into, this is what we are deciding is a remote work or hybrid work, standard process. What if we as executives are laying it out and we're not doing it by listening to our employees? They're not going to be happy. We have to hear our employees. That is impacting the employee experience if we don't listen to them. And by not listening to our employees and negatively impacting that employee experience, that will completely roll through to your customer experience. So it's incredibly important to listen to them.
And I think you're picking up there on one very important sort of condition for one another, like the employee experience and how it's affecting customer experience. And also that, again, as an argument to why it's so important to look into diversity, equity, and inclusion nowadays, and particularly now. I'm picking up here on Nancy's comment. We also have to consider the extent to which we need to collaborate with others, which may be not always best done face to face. So it isn't always about the individual employee on what he or she wants and needs. It's also about what work the team needs to do together at any point in time. And that's fantastic. Nancy, so much for sharing this with us. It was just one of the points that we also discussed last week during a conference in Austria, where the argument of one of the keynote speakers was exactly this. It's not only about the individual, but also about the team.
Exactly. Exactly. 100%. And that goes to, what are the challenges about the team for remote work versus in person? We talk about the collaboration remotely. It is possible. Some teams are more, it also depends on the work product, right? Engineers versus customer service versus, it just depends on what it is you're collaborating about. Balancing meeting times as a team across multiple time zones around the world. Is your team in Austria and Ireland and in Texas and in Hong Kong? That can be super complicated to try and coordinate collaboration with a team like that. So it might be more beneficial to try and coordinate a quarterly in team. Who knows? But again, that's why you can't say it is a one size fits all. This is the way it has to be done. You have to look at it by that individual view. Managing projects, it can be very difficult, but it absolutely can be done. There are some amazing tools. Jira is an amazing tool. Trello is an amazing tool. Asana is an amazing tool. So there are some phenomenal tools for managing projects remotely. One of the most important things with remote work is you must be purposeful. If you are not purposeful with remote work, it's going to be chaos.
And that's a very good point. Thanks a lot for picking up on that. Purposeful and being intentional about not only the way you communicate, but the way you collaborate, the way you lead, and also the way you organize yourselves as a team. And when we come back now also to pick up on diversity and inclusion in remote organizations, how do you promote diversity and inclusion remotely? So do you have any examples or ideas that you can leave us with?
So I think that there are a lot of things that you can do here. First of all, keep the dialogue open, right? Making sure that everybody, again, going to that employee experience, right? You want to make sure everybody has a voice and you're keeping that open. You want to create channels that are available to offer support for all of your groups. We want to make sure that there's groups for your diversity in workforce, women in leadership, LGBTQ, working parents, single parents, multilingual employees. So there are a lot of ERT groups that you can have that are available to help not just Let your DEI groups be representative, but making sure that they're getting their voices heard, making sure that they are feeling like they have their own cultural representation within your organization. And that is incredibly important. Making sure that you're involving your entire team in issues that matter to them and causes that they care about, including philanthropy efforts. DEI and philanthropy very much go side by side together, and making sure that everybody feels comfortable voicing their opinions, making sure that they feel, again, safe sharing those things in meetings and soliciting open dialogue. So there are a lot of things that you can do to make sure that you're making sure that your DEI groups are feeling heard, feeling psychologically safe, physically safe as you move forward.
Let me ask you a question. So, if I understood correctly, you were mentioning now asynchronous communication channels that could be in place in your remote first or remote organization, correct?
Very good. Yes.
And this is fantastic because also just thinking back about what you mentioned, psychological safety and all the burnout, stress that was going on during the pandemic. And I'm just remembering Betsy Bowler. She is a remote work expert from GitLab. She was on my LinkedIn Live a few months ago. And we talked also about GitLab having a specific communication channel only to talk about depression and mental health issues. So also this already tells employees that there is a space where you can voice all those things that you might not feel comfortable to voice in any other organization. And this very much relates to what you were saying, creating asynchronous communication channels, because you might not be able to have, or you should not have that many synchronous meetings.
Exactly. And it gives a space for people to say it's okay not to be okay. And look, I'm not the only one that's not okay.
Absolutely. So if you think about the leaders, and I know we're running out of time, but I just still have two questions and one more that somebody wrote me privately to ask you. So if we think about leaders and what they should or could do differently to attract diverse talent in a remote context, do you have there a few suggestions that our listeners could take with them?
Could you repeat that?
What could leaders do differently to attract and lead diverse talent in a remote context, or what should they do differently? Leaders, if we talk about leadership.
I think that whenever you're talking about leading a diverse group, it is incredibly important to listen. Honestly, whenever I'm leading a diverse group, if I'm doing all the talking, that's a problem. I need to make sure that I'm hearing what they're saying, and that I am open to what they have to say, also soliciting the feedback from them. I am so incredibly touched and interested whenever I get critical feedback from my team, especially team members that are of a different geographic area, different region, different cultural background, and they provide feedback to me of, Anne, I took something that you said the wrong way, and I just want to talk to you about it to see if that's how you meant it. Oftentimes, that is not how I meant it, but I could have said it differently in order to make sure that it came across. So if I'm open and I've presented it to them that they know that I'm open to hearing this type of feedback, and they're actually willing to share it with me, this really opens the door for my teams to be able to help me grow as a leader and help mentor them up to be the next generation of leaders. And if we're bringing more leaders from a DEI perspective into L1 and L2 type of leadership teams, our world is just going to be better. More
Absolutely.
leadership.
That's a very great point that you're mentioning here. And I think if we talk about actively listening, this also very much still in a remote and remote first, asynchronous first context, it also has a lot to do with writing skills. And probably also here, I'm just thinking about another topic. You mentioned diversity of thought, so diverse team members. Of course, this means also more communication challenges as diversity brings along different communication styles, preferences, ways of saying things. So also just thinking here what they probably should all, we know that it's a practice, it's a good practice for remote teams. It's to have a team charter, the guidelines, right, on how we communicate, when we communicate, what channels we use. But also from a diversity perspective, now it even becomes more important.
And and you've hit on a couple of topics here. Asynchronous and written communication and remote work is incredibly important. And I've seen so much talk about communicating asynchronously, but I highly encourage people to not just completely drop the verbal touch bases, because it is those one-on-one, just getting to know, hey, Barbara, I just want to spend 30 minutes just touching base. How are you doing? How are the kids? How's your dog? It is those moments right there where I connect and make sure that they're individually okay and see how everybody's doing. Those moments are precious in a remote work environment. Yes, asynchronous communication from a work perspective, but value those personal touch bases where you're actually talking to the individual and getting to know them and make sure everybody's okay. Those are so important.
Totally, absolutely agree. But also here, coming back to what you said, we need to be intentional and purposeful on how we communicate. And I'm just thinking again, so team guidelines, the team charter, or on how we communicate, also something that, of course, supports diversity, equity, inclusion, because it tries to bring everybody on the same page on how we like to work together to some extent.
Exactly.
Super. And another last question. It just came in very recently. So about when we think about collaboration and team members, we talked about from a leader's perspective, active listening is so important. Would you say that team members should also foster their active listening and written communication skills? Is there something else that from a team member perspective I might need to think about or consider?
Absolutely. So not just absolutely, they should foster active listening, and that is definitely something, but trying to make sure from that individual view that they are learning how to work on their time management skills, and making sure that they know how to keep work at work. That is one of the things that if I see an individual not managing that well, if they're not managing their time management and not closing the door, even a virtual door, if their office is in their dining room, not learning how to leave work at work, burnout will occur. So those are some things that we try and encourage and help people learn how to do.
And that is fantastic. I just think about an example of one of my coaching clients who told me that he started now saying goodbye to the computer before he closes down. And it's just, it sounds like a silly thing, but it helps him very much to sort of really say like, this is it. Goodbye, ciao, hasta mañana.
I think it's great. It's a very physical thing that makes your brain say, this is done. It's perfect.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for all your experiences, the ideas and the thoughts that you were sharing with us. It was fantastic having you here on the Virtual Space, your LinkedIn live stage. And thanks a lot for making space in your calendar. You know that backstage in the dark room, I still have a virtual cocktail prepared and will join you there in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Virtual Space, your community, for your comments, also for your questions, because very often I do know that you cannot attend live and you always have the possibility to send through the questions that you would like me to pick up upon, and always beforehand. You know that Virtual Space, your LinkedIn Lives are happening Thursdays, usually at 5:30. Next week, I'm going to be traveling. That's why it's not happening. But check out the webpage on virtualspacehero.com. You can find already all the upcoming guests for the rest of the year. Yes, I'm really excited too that I have the whole year planned out. And I already have a queue for January 2023 starting there in my agenda. So thanks a lot. And I'm wishing you a beautiful morning, afternoon, evening, or good night. Bye.